Marcus Chen had always been different from his colleagues at the National Security Agency. While others rushed to meetings with coffee-stained shirts and tired eyes, Marcus arrived each morning with a notebook full of detailed observations and theories that most people found too complex to understand. His desk was organized with military precision, covered in charts, maps, and printouts that told stories others couldn't see. For 3 years, Marcus had been tracking unusual communication patterns across various international networks. He noticed something that made his stomach turn cold. Hidden within seemingly normal business communications, he detected coded messages that suggested a major security threat was developing. The patterns were subtle, almost invisible, but Marcus had trained himself to spot these irregularities. Every morning, Marcus would arrive at his windowless office 2 hours before his shift officially began. He would spread out his research, connect dots that others missed, and prepare detailed reports for his supervisor, Director Sarah Walsh. But each time he presented his findings, the response was the same: polite nods, promises to look into it, and suggestions that he might be overthinking things. Director Walsh was a practical woman who had climbed the ranks through steady conventional work. She appreciated Marcus's dedication, but found his theories too complicated and his conclusions too dramatic. During their weekly meetings, she would listen patiently as Marcus explained his latest discoveries, but her mind was usually focused on more immediate concerns like budget approvals and staff schedules. "Marcus, I understand your concerns," Director Walsh would say, tapping her pen against her desk. "But we need to focus on concrete threats, not theoretical possibilities. The communications you're analyzing could have dozens of innocent explanations." Marcus would leave these meetings feeling frustrated but not defeated. He knew what he was seeing in the data, and he couldn't ignore it. The coded messages were becoming more frequent, more urgent. Someone was planning something big, and Marcus was probably the only person in the entire agency who realized it. His colleagues began to view Marcus as the office conspiracy theorist. During lunch breaks, they would joke about his secret discoveries and his habit of staying late to analyze data that seemed meaningless to everyone else. Some people respected his work ethic, but most thought he was wasting time chasing shadows. Agent Jennifer Torres, who worked at the desk next to Marcus, often watched him scribble notes and draw connections between seemingly unrelated events. She admired his passion, but worried that he was becoming obsessed with finding patterns that might not exist. "Maybe you should take a vacation," Jennifer suggested one afternoon as she watched Marcus study a printout covered in his handwritten notes. "You've been working on this project for months without a break." Marcus looked up from his work, his eyes tired but determined. "I can't stop now, Jennifer. Every day that passes, the communications become more urgent. Something is going to happen soon, and when it does, people will wish they had listened to me." The truth was that Marcus had discovered evidence of a coordinated international operation. Foreign agents were using business communications to plan what appeared to be a significant attack on American infrastructure. The messages were hidden within routine emails about shipping schedules, inventory reports, and meeting confirmations. But Marcus had developed a system for decoding these messages, and what he found terrified him. 3 different terrorist cells were communicating through these hidden channels. They were coordinating timing, sharing resources, and finalizing plans for simultaneous attacks on power grids, communication networks, and transportation hubs. Marcus estimated that the attacks would happen within the next 2 weeks. But he couldn't convince anyone to take his warnings seriously. Director Walsh had her own pressures to deal with. Her department was already over budget, understaffed, and dealing with several high-priority cases that demanded immediate attention. Marcus's theories, while detailed and well-researched, seemed too complex and too speculative to justify diverting resources from more pressing matters. During one particularly tense meeting, Marcus laid out his entire case. He showed Director Walsh the coded messages, explained his decryption methods, and presented a timeline that predicted when and where the attacks would occur. He spoke for nearly an hour, his voice growing more urgent with each piece of evidence he presented. Director Walsh listened carefully, taking notes and asking occasional questions. But when Marcus finished his presentation, her response was disappointing, but predictable. "Marcus, this is impressive work," she said, closing her notebook. "But you're asking me to believe that you've single-handedly uncovered a major terrorist plot that has escaped detection by every other intelligence agency. That's a big leap." Marcus felt his heart sink. He had spent months building his case, sacrificing sleep and personal relationships to track these communications. He knew he was right, but he also knew that his reputation as an overly cautious analyst was working against him. "Director Walsh, I understand how this sounds," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his frustration. "But the evidence is all here. These aren't random coincidences or innocent business communications. These are coded instructions for coordinated attacks." Director Walsh stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "I'll review your report again, Marcus, but right now, I need you to focus on the Henderson case. That's our priority." Marcus gathered his papers and left the office feeling defeated, but not broken. He knew he couldn't give up, even if it meant working alone. That night, he stayed at the office until nearly midnight, double-checking his analysis and preparing an even more detailed report. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of presenting his findings to Director Walsh, he would compile everything into a comprehensive document and submit it directly to the deputy director. It was a risky move that could damage his career, but Marcus believed the threat was too serious to ignore. For the next week, Marcus worked in secret, refining his analysis and preparing a report that would be impossible to dismiss. He included detailed charts, decoded messages, timeline predictions, and recommendations for immediate action. The document was 47 pages long and represented the most important work of his career. As Marcus prepared to submit his report, he couldn't help but wonder if anyone would take it seriously. He had spent years building his reputation as a careful, methodical analyst, but his colleagues still saw him as someone who worried too much about unlikely scenarios. This time, however, Marcus was certain that the threat was real, immediate, and catastrophic if left unchecked. Marcus submitted his comprehensive report to Deputy Director Robert Hayes on a Thursday morning, knowing that this decision could either validate his career or destroy it completely. Deputy Director Hayes was known for his no-nonsense approach and his ability to cut through bureaucratic noise to identify real threats. If anyone would take Marcus's warnings seriously, it would be Hayes. 3 days passed without any response. Marcus continued his regular duties, analyzing routine intelligence reports and attending team meetings, but his mind remained focused on the coded communications he had been tracking. The messages were becoming more frequent and more specific. Based on his latest analysis, Marcus believed the coordinated attacks would begin within the next 5 days. On Sunday evening, Marcus made a decision that violated several agency protocols. He drove to the office after hours and used his security clearance to access additional communication intercepts that had been collected over the weekend. What he found made his blood run cold. The final activation codes had been sent. According to Marcus's decryption system, all 3 terrorist cells had received their go signals. The attacks were scheduled to begin in exactly 72 hours, starting with the power grid in Chicago, followed by communication networks in Atlanta, and ending with transportation hubs in Los Angeles. Marcus knew he couldn't wait for official channels. He spent the entire night updating his report with the new information, including precise timing predictions and specific target locations. By dawn, he had created what he believed was an irrefutable case for immediate action. When Director Walsh arrived at her office Monday morning, she found Marcus waiting outside her door with a thick folder and an expression of barely controlled desperation. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his eyes were red from lack of sleep, and his hands shook slightly as he held his updated report. "Director Walsh, I need 5 minutes," Marcus said before she could speak. "The attacks are going to start Wednesday morning. I have the exact locations and timing." Director Walsh looked at Marcus with a mixture of concern and annoyance. She had been dealing with pressure from her own supervisors about department efficiency, and Marcus's obsession with his theoretical terrorist plot was becoming a distraction. "Marcus, you look terrible. When was the last time you went home?" she asked, unlocking her office door. "That doesn't matter," Marcus replied, following her inside. "What matters is that people are going to die on Wednesday unless we act now." Director Walsh sat down at her desk and gestured for Marcus to take a seat. She had known Marcus for 3 years and had never seen him this agitated. Despite her skepticism about his theories, she was beginning to worry about his mental state. "Marcus, I received a call from Deputy Director Hayes about your report," she said carefully. "He's concerned that you might be under too much stress." Marcus felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Instead of taking his warnings seriously, the deputy director was questioning his psychological stability. The frustration that had been building for months suddenly exploded. "Stress?" Marcus stood up abruptly, his voice rising. "Director, in 60 hours, 3 major American cities are going to be attacked simultaneously. Power grids will fail, communication networks will collapse, and transportation systems will shut down. Thousands of people could die. And you're worried about my stress level?" Director Walsh remained calm, but her expression showed growing concern. "Marcus, I need you to take a step back and listen to yourself. You're talking about predicting specific attacks based on your interpretation of routine business communications. Do you understand how that sounds?" Marcus realized that his emotional outburst had probably damaged his credibility even further. But he couldn't stop himself from trying one more time to make her understand. "Director Walsh, I've been tracking these communications for 8 months. I've documented patterns, decoded messages, and identified coordinating signals. This isn't speculation or paranoia. This is careful analysis of real intelligence data." Director Walsh stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the parking lot where other employees were arriving for their normal workday. She thought about Marcus's dedication, his attention to detail, and his track record as a reliable analyst. But she also thought about the consequences of mobilizing resources based on one person's interpretation of ambiguous data. "Marcus, I'm going to ask Dr. Reeves from our Psychological Services Department to speak with you," she said, without turning around. Marcus felt his world collapse. Being referred for psychological evaluation was essentially career suicide in the intelligence community. Once his superiors questioned his mental stability, his credibility would be permanently damaged. "Director Walsh, you're making a mistake," Marcus said quietly. "When those attacks happen on Wednesday, everyone will know that the warning signs were there. They'll know that someone tried to prevent it." Director Walsh turned back to face Marcus, her expression softening slightly. "Marcus, if your predictions are accurate, if these attacks actually happen, then we'll know you were right. But until then, I have to consider the possibility that you're seeing patterns that don't exist." Marcus left Director Walsh's office knowing that his career at the National Security Agency was essentially over. But more importantly, he knew that he had less than 60 hours to find someone who would listen to his warnings and take action to prevent a national catastrophe. That afternoon, Marcus made the most dangerous decision of his career. He decided to bypass the entire chain of command and contact General Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking military official with direct access to the president's security briefings. General Morrison had a reputation for decisive action and zero tolerance for bureaucratic delays. Getting a message to General Morrison required Marcus to violate several security protocols and risk federal charges for unauthorized disclosure of classified information. But as he sat in his office that evening, looking at the latest intercepted communications that confirmed his timeline predictions, Marcus knew he had no choice. He spent 2 hours crafting a concise but comprehensive message that summarized his findings without revealing specific methods or sources. The message included his prediction that coordinated attacks would begin in 54 hours, targeting critical infrastructure in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. Marcus encrypted the message using a secure channel that would deliver it directly to General Morrison's personal communication system. As he prepared to send it, he knew that this action would likely result in his arrest and prosecution. But he also knew that if he was right about the attacks, his sacrifice would be worth it. At 11:47 p.m. on Monday night, Marcus sent his warning to General Morrison and then went home to wait for whatever consequences would follow. He had done everything in his power to prevent a disaster that he believed would devastate 3 American cities and kill thousands of innocent people. As he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Marcus wondered if General Morrison would dismiss his message as the work of a delusional analyst or recognize it as a credible warning that demanded immediate investigation. Either way, Marcus had reached the point of no return. His career was finished, but maybe, just maybe, he had saved countless lives. General Patricia Morrison received Marcus's encrypted message at 6:15 a.m. on Tuesday morning while reviewing her daily intelligence briefings. As a 26-year veteran of military intelligence, she had learned to quickly separate credible threats from false alarms, but something about this particular message caught her attention. The message was detailed, specific, and included information that only someone with deep access to classified communications could possess. More importantly, the sender had bypassed all normal channels and risked serious criminal charges to deliver this warning directly to her. General Morrison had seen enough genuine intelligence in her career to recognize that this was either the work of a dangerous security breach or a legitimate warning from someone who had exhausted all other options. General Morrison immediately contacted her chief intelligence officer, Colonel James Martinez, and ordered him to conduct an emergency verification of the claims made in the anonymous message. She gave Colonel Martinez 6 hours to either confirm or debunk the predicted attacks, using all available resources and personnel. Meanwhile, Marcus was sitting in a conference room at the NSA building, facing Director Walsh and 2 agents from internal security. His unauthorized contact with General Morrison had been discovered within hours, and he was now under investigation for potential violations of the Espionage Act. "Marcus, what you did last night was not only against protocol, it was a federal crime," Director Walsh said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You sent classified intelligence to a military official without authorization, using secure channels that were never meant for this purpose." Marcus looked across the table at the 3 people who held his future in their hands. He knew that his career was over, regardless of what happened next, but he still hoped that his warning had reached someone who could act on it. "Director Walsh, I understand the consequences of my actions," Marcus replied calmly. "But if I'm right about these attacks, then breaking protocol was the right thing to do." One of the internal security agents, Special Agent Davis, leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, do you realize that your unauthorized disclosure of classified information could result in 20 years in federal prison?" Marcus nodded. "I'm aware of the potential penalties, Agent Davis, but I'm also aware that thousands of people could die tomorrow if my warnings are ignored." While Marcus faced the consequences of his unauthorized disclosure, Colonel Martinez was working frantically to verify the intelligence claims. He had assembled a team of 12 analysts and given them access to all available communication intercepts from the past 6 months. What Colonel Martinez's team discovered in the next 4 hours shocked everyone involved. Using the decryption methods outlined in the anonymous message, they were able to confirm the existence of coded communications between 3 separate terrorist cells. The messages were hidden within routine business emails, exactly as the warning had described. More alarming was the discovery that the final activation codes had indeed been sent, and the timing predictions appeared to be accurate. According to their analysis, coordinated attacks on American infrastructure were scheduled to begin in approximately 14 hours. Colonel Martinez immediately contacted General Morrison with his findings. "General, we've confirmed the essential elements of that anonymous warning. We have 3 active terrorist cells preparing to attack power grids, communication networks, and transportation hubs in Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles." General Morrison felt her stomach tighten. In her entire career, she had never dealt with a threat of this magnitude and complexity. 3 simultaneous attacks on critical infrastructure could cripple the American economy and cause casualties that would make September 11th seem small by comparison. "Colonel Martinez, I need you to brief the Secretary of Defense immediately," General Morrison ordered. "Tell him we have credible intelligence of imminent terrorist attacks and request permission to initiate emergency response protocols." Within 2 hours, General Morrison was in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, briefing Secretary of Defense William Carter and a room full of high-ranking military and intelligence officials. The evidence that Colonel Martinez's team had gathered was compelling and terrifying. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have less than 12 hours to prevent what could be the most devastating terrorist attack in American history," General Morrison said, standing before a large screen that displayed the locations and timing of the predicted attacks. Secretary Carter studied the intelligence briefing, his expression growing more serious with each page. "General Morrison, what's the source of this intelligence?" "Sir, the warning came from an NSA analyst who has been tracking these communications for 8 months, General Morrison replied. "His superiors dismissed his concerns, so he contacted me directly, violating several protocols in the process." Secretary Carter looked up from the briefing. "Where is this analyst now?" "Sir, he's currently under investigation for unauthorized disclosure of classified information." Secretary Carter closed the briefing folder and looked around the room at the assembled officials. "I don't care about protocols right now. If this analyst's predictions are accurate, he may have just saved thousands of American lives." The decision was made to implement immediate emergency response measures. Within 3 hours, FBI counterterrorism teams were dispatched to Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. Power companies were alerted to implement enhanced security protocols. Communication networks were reinforced with backup systems. Transportation hubs received emergency security reinforcements. At 3:47 a.m. on Wednesday morning, FBI teams simultaneously raided 3 separate locations, arresting 12 individuals who were in the final stages of preparing coordinated attacks on American infrastructure. The raids recovered explosives, communication equipment, and detailed plans that matched Marcus's predictions with frightening accuracy. The attacks had been scheduled to begin at exactly 6 a.m., just 2 hours and 13 minutes after the arrests were made. Later that morning, General Morrison personally visited the NSA building to meet with Marcus, who was still being held pending the resolution of his security violations. When she entered the conference room where Marcus was waiting, she was accompanied by Director Walsh and Deputy Director Hayes. "Mr. Chen," General Morrison said, extending her hand for a handshake, "I want to personally thank you for your courage and your dedication to protecting American lives." Marcus stood up, still somewhat shocked that his warnings had been taken seriously and acted upon. "General Morrison, I just did what I thought was necessary." General Morrison turned to Director Walsh and Deputy Director Hayes. "This man's analysis prevented one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in our nation's history. His methods may have been unconventional, but his results speak for themselves." Director Walsh looked at Marcus with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. For months, she had dismissed his warnings as the work of an overly anxious analyst, Now she realized that her skepticism had nearly allowed a national catastrophe. "Marcus, I owe you an apology," Director Walsh said. "Your persistence and dedication saved countless lives, and I should have listened to you." The investigation into Marcus's unauthorized disclosure was quietly dropped, and his security clearance was not only maintained, but upgraded. Within 6 months, he was promoted to senior intelligence analyst and given his own team to investigate similar threats. The terrorist plot that Marcus uncovered became a classified case study in intelligence analysis, used to train future analysts about the importance of persistent investigation and the dangers of dismissing unconventional theories. Marcus never sought public recognition for his role in preventing the attacks. He returned to his work with the same dedication and attention to detail that had made his discovery possible, knowing that somewhere in the vast network of global communications, other threats were waiting to be detected by someone patient enough to look for them. Years later, when colleagues would ask Marcus about his experience, he would simply say that good intelligence work requires the courage to see patterns that others miss and the determination to act on those observations, even when nobody believes you. The 3 terrorist cells that were arrested had been planning their attacks for over 2 years, using sophisticated encryption methods and carefully coordinated timing. Without Marcus's intervention, their plot would have succeeded, causing massive casualties and economic disruption that could have taken decades to repair. General Morrison kept a copy of Marcus's original warning in her personal files, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important intelligence comes from sources that others consider unreliable or unconventional.